everybody, this is Mike from the Rewatch project, back with another front row video where I look at, analyse, review, contextualise and do other spoilery things to some classic music performances. This edition I'm going to be looking at a live performance of So Alive by Ryan Adams from 2003 from his album Rock and Roll. This is from The Late Show with David Letterman, and I'm going to get straight into this, and I'll stop and provide a little bit of commentary as we go forward. So let's do it.
Then. We're very happy to have our next guest on the program. He is a talented singer-songwriter.
Got to point out actually that being from the UK, David Letterman wasn't really a thing for us over there. He was on TV. He was on late night on Sky One, which was one of the cable satellite channels that we got in the late 80s. So we're aware of him, and I guess there's enough familiarity with David Letterman for there to be a little bit of nostalgia watching this, and also being a music geek as well. You know, I mean, there weren't that many opportunities on American television to see live performances, really. I mean, there was Saturday Night Live and a few of the late nights, so it was always a really great way of being able to see these live performances. You know, record fairs on VHS, I'd sometimes get compilations of them, and then obviously as YouTube came along, so it was always a great way of doing that. And Ryan Adams made a number of appearances on late night TV, including Letterman and Leno and all of those various other ones. So let's carry on.
Writer responsible for some great rock and roll music, and the brand new CD is certainly no exception. In fact, that's the name, Rock and Roll. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Ryan Adams.
So this band he's got here, you can see on the right Brad Rice, who is a session guitarist who played with Ryan in his prior band, the LAX. And you can see the drummer Johnny T, who was the key collaborator for Ryan on the album Rock and Roll. He played drums, but also co-produced with him and helped him contextualize this. Ryan was at a really weird point in his career at this point, because obviously, I mean, he'd come to prominence in the 90s in the alternative country band Whiskey Town, and they were a big part of the alt country scene, or the no depression scene as it was known. And these were bands who ostensibly were country bands. I mean, Ryan himself was from South Carolina, but these were bands who grown up listening to punk rock. You know, I mean, Ryan was really into Husker Du and Black Sabbath, and so their influences kind of were through this prism of alternative music and of metal and punk and goth and all of these sort of things, and grunge as well, I think, was a big influence. So it was a really interesting sort of combination of things. And then he put out a couple of real critical darling solo albums, Heartbreaker and Gold, and he was really kind of being primed at this point to be the heir apparent to the singer-songwriter crown. You know, he was all of the, I guess, Uncut magazine, and a lot of people in the music industry and the journalists and the tweed jacket kind of elbow patch critics were saying that, he came from this lineage of, Tom Petty and Bruce Springsteen and Bob Dylan, and this is where he was going. And, he'd released those first two albums and they'd been really, really successful. And then he went to his record company in the early 2000s after the success of those first two albums. And he was primed, he was really primed by the music press and the industry itself to be the next guy with a guitar, and he went to Lost Highways record company with his third solo album, Love Is Hell, and they kind of freaked out. They didn't like it. They felt that it was too dark. It's an amazing album. It would eventually get released as two separate volumes, two long EPs, but it was a very brittle, gothic, emotionally wrought album. It was kind of his Kid A, is in utero in many ways. but he hadn't quite reached that level of success yet that I think warranted that, or meant you could kind of get away with that. So the record company were like, no, we're not going to take it. So he went back into the studio and really quickly recorded the album Rock and Roll, but this song's off. And the album itself was an ode to British indie alternative music from the 80s. You know, bands like the Smiths and The Cure, and early U2 as well were really prominent. And also what was happening in America at the time was the rise of the new wave of garage rock, you know, the Strokes, the White Stripes, and in the UK with Razorlight and the Libertines. So all of these things were in the air, were in the soup, and Ryan released this album, which was Rock and Roll, that a lot of people saw as a bit of a middle finger to his record company, which was, you know, an ode to electric guitar-driven alternative music, and also, you know, hair metal. And the album's got this really tinny, abrasive kind of production, and is really throwaway, and definitely not one for the elbow patch, tweed, uncut magazine crowd, you know, who really were thinking that he was going to be the next Jerry Garcia or whoever. So, you know, that's where he was at this point, you know, in his career. You know, he'd been freaking out a little bit about the fact that, you know, he was friends with Elton John at this point. You know, I mean, he'd been ordained by Elton John as being the next big thing. And yeah, he was having a bit of a freak out. So here we are with the first single from the said album, Rock and Roll. So as I say, the band's a bit of a Frankenstein's monster of his recent bands. He's got a great look here. Nice hi-hat work there from Johnny T, keeping the rhythm propulsive. Really raw vocals from Ryan Adams here. Listen to how high he goes here on the chorus. And I guess it's worth pointing out too that, I mean, Ryan Adams is a really great technical vocalist. I mean, he's duetted with Emmylou Harris. You know, I mean, this is a guy who, you know, has played in the big leagues in this regard. So what he's doing here, and I mentioned this in the Elvis video that I covered for the performance of If I Can Dream from the '68 comeback special, where I likened it to driving a Rolls Royce off-road, where what he's doing here is using a voice that's very technically strong, but really pushing it so he's on the edge of breaking it and being outside of his comfort zone. And that creates a sense of vulnerability and emotional honesty. And I think that this song, which is about, I guess, sort of emotional empathy and emotional kinship, it seems kind of appropriate that he'd be doing that. You'll also hear a lot in the vocals that early Bono voice as well, and a little bit of Morrissey as well. But then on the chorus, as I say, he goes really high, and he's really playing at the edge of his voice. So yeah, let's keep going. You hear the great arpeggiated guitars that Brad Rice is doing there. And Ryan's not playing guitar here as well, which is unusual for him. He pushes his voice even harder on this chorus. Yeah, really high there. And if you listen to the guitars as well, that really kind of abrasive sound. I mean, what's going on there is that's really similar to what the Strokes did a lot at the time, where they had their two guitars, where you'd have one guitar playing often a really simple driving rhythm that would just be following the kick drum, and then another guitar that would be picking away and playing something a little bit more sort of fanciful. But what you've got here is, actually I'm going to grab my guitar for this. Apologies. So what you've got is you've got Brad Rice. I don't know if I'm picking up here, so let's see. Got the open E string. but he's like playing the B string, but leaving the E string open. So that creates this really gnarly effect of. And underneath that, you've just got really simple arpeggiated chords, like a kind of thing going on there, almost like a sort of Peter Buck REM kind of thing going on. So what you get is you get this real traditional singer-songwriter kind of chording, really pretty, kind of nice, almost Johnny Marr-ish thing going on. But then you've got this really abrasive kind of, open E string with the B played against it. That was really similar to a lot of the stuff that the Libertines and the Strokes were doing at the time as well. So it replaces this in both of those worlds. And this was a really interesting time as well because Ryan, don't want to get into his personal life too much, but he wasn't in great shape at this point. Famously, the Strokes said that he was a bad influence on them with drinking and drug use. The Strokes said he was a bad influence on them, so that tells you a lot. And he was in the midst of a lot of that when he was playing on this tour. Really pushing his voice there, and that can't be healthy. And he'd always end the set with this. And it's worth pointing out as well, I mean, this song, he hasn't played this since his tour. I mean, his tour famously ended, and it closed a part of his career as well because, he'd come up with Whiskey Town. He'd had that success with the first two albums. He somewhat sabotaged it by releasing an album that was not what people really wanted. And, the album was heavily derided. I think this is an oversimplification. I think it's a great album, really, in a lot of ways, but it was certainly not the best move. It was not the move of somebody who cared about their career. Let's put it that way. And I think that what happened was on the tour, he would be kind of defiantly not playing old material, kind of getting a little bit antagonistic with the audience. I think a lot of the things that were going on in his personal life, shall we say, were perhaps affecting some of the on-stage decisions and the career decisions he was making. But what this all came to a head in Liverpool, final night of the UK tour in 2003. He was playing the song Shadowlands, which a song from Love Is Hell, which had, I think, been released as 2 EPs at that point. So the whole debacle ended up being fruitless anyway, and it's since been released in one volume anyway, as it was originally intended. But he had his eyes closed during a performance, and he walked to the end of the stage, and he fell off, and he really badly broke his arm, and it almost destroyed his career. He didn't play for a really long time. Any momentum that he got was kind of lost at that point. He didn't really come back for another couple of years. He had to relearn how to play guitar. He damaged his arm so badly that he had to learn the Django Reinhardt approach of guitar, where the way that you bar your chords is completely different. The way that you use your left hand to fret and hold the strings, it has to be changed. It's almost like shifting from left-handed to right-handed. And he had to do that before he could come back. And when he did come back, he was a very different guy. I'll show you. This is his next TV performance when he had returned.
27 years of nothing but failures and promises.
This is Ryan Adams and the Cardinals in 2005. Great band, the Cardinals, but you can see that Ryan's hiding here. He's grown a beard. He's back to playing rootsy, Grateful Dead-y music. Not a hint of the Strokes here. A lot of the swagger's gone. So it almost feels like something had to come to a head. That look. I almost feel like that untucked shirt, was perhaps practiced in front of the mirror. I don't think anything's an accident with this guy. Dave, can we do the glad handing thing?
Ryan Adams, everybody. Fantastic. I enjoyed that, sir.
And it's worth pointing out that I think Letterman was a legitimate fan. He had Ryan on the show a lot. When The Late Show was going off the air and Letterman was doing his final ever run, he got some of his favourite artists back, and Ryan was one of them. Look, here's Ryan in 2015 turning the lights out on the Letterman show. See, television resolution for network late night shows improved in the 12 years. The reason I want to show this though is look how legitimately into this Letterman is at the end of this performance. I always really enjoyed this thing.
Ryan Adams, how you doing? Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. 14 years old, that song is something like that? Fantastic. Ryan Adams, ladies and gentlemen. The album is live at Carnegie Hall. Just a little more. Can you reprise? Just a little more. Just a little more. Just a little
I
more.
love how genuinely surprised the band members look by this.
Just a little more. Good night, everybody.
But yeah, worldwide pants. So yeah, so that's So Alive by Ryan Adams. And like I say, he never played this song again. I think that this was one of those periods in his career that was very difficult, but as is often the case, resulted in some great music. And I think that for those of you that have dismissed that rock and roll album, go back and check it out. And I think So Alive is one of the best songs on it. And I think in any of their artists' catalogue, that would be a first song of the Uncles kind of song, and it says a lot about this guy's career. And it has had its ups and downs, for sure. There's been some personal issues that have been quite public recently. I'm not going to get into that. I mentioned in the Elvis episode that this is about the performances themselves, and I think that performance of So Alive is a guy kind of who's just who's a searcher, and he's melding a lot of really interesting elements of Americana, but also British indie music, and also bringing in a lot of things that were going on at the time, in that era when that garage rock aesthetic had returned, and I think that results in a really fascinating performance. And there's a lot of them as well. I mean, Ryan Adams has done a lot of these TV performances, as well as, obviously a lot of specials like Austin City Limits and all those kind of things. So I think he's one of those artists where his live career is really well documented, and there's some gold in those hills. So that's it for this episode. I'll be back soon to do another Front Row. Please do also check out the Pod Syndicate YouTube feed and the Tunestroker versus Punter YouTube feed. They're the other shows that and networks that I work on. And also please do subscribe and like to this channel, the Rewatch Project, and please do check out also the podcast, the Rewatch Project, that I do with my wife Hannah, where we do rewatches of television and film franchises and discuss those. So thanks for watching. Bye bye.